Alright, listen up, mystery fanatics. Got a puzzle for you. What's the best place online to dive into the unknown, unravel secrets, and explore the world's most intriguing enigmas? If you guessed detective codename X, you're already on the right track. Welcome to the channel where curiosity is our compass, and every question leads to another clue. If you love a good mystery, if you crave the thrill of the solve, then you've found your tribe. This is where the most curious minds gather to explore the unexplained together. So, here's your mission. Should you choose to accept it, hit that subscribe button right now. Join the detective codename X community and never miss a single piece of the puzzle. Subscribing is your key to unlocking a world of intrigue. Be the first to know when a new case drops and join the discussion with fellow mystery enthusiasts. Welcome aboard, detective. Let's solve some mysteries. Alcatraz escape. Aerial view of Alcatraz Island in January 1932. The island was used as a maximum security federal prison from 1934 to 1963. View of the interior of the Alcatraz Island prison in 1986, looking south from the third-level guard station with cell block B on the left and cell block C on the right. Library of Congress photograph. In its heyday, it was the ultimate maximum security prison. Located on a lonely island in the middle of San Francisco Bay, Alcatraz, aka The Rock, had held captives since the Civil War. But it was in 1934, the high point of a major war on crime, that Alcatraz was refortified into the world's most secure prison. Its eventual inmates included dangerous public enemies like Al Capone and George Machine Gun Kelly, criminals who had a history of escapes, and the occasional odd character like the infamous Birdman of Alcatraz. In the 1930s, Alcatraz was already a forbidding place, surrounded by the cold, rough waters of the Pacific. The redesign included tougher iron bars, a series of strategically positioned guard towers, and strict rules, including a dozen checks a day of the prisoners. Escape seemed near impossible. Despite the odds, from 1934 until the prison was closed in 1963, 36 men tried 14 separate escapes. Nearly all were caught or didn't survive the attempt. The fate of 3 particular inmates, however, remains a mystery to this day. Here is their story. The escapees Frank Morris arrived at Alcatraz in January 1960 after convictions for bank robbery, burglary, and other crimes, and repeated attempts to escape various prisons. Later that year, a convict by the name of John Anglin was sent to Alcatraz, followed by his brother Clarence in early 1961. All 3 knew each other from previous stints in prison. Assigned to adjoining cells, they began hatching a plan to escape. Morris, known for his intelligence, took the lead in the planning. They were aided by another inmate, Alan West, John Anglin, Clarence Anglin, Frank Morris. Missing. On June 12, 1962, the routine early morning bed check turned out to be anything but. 3 convicts were not in their cells: John Anglin, his brother Clarence, and Frank Morris. In their beds were cleverly built dummy heads made of plaster, flesh-tone paint, and real human hair that apparently fooled the night guards. The prison went into lockdown, and an intensive search began. Profile of the dummy head found in Morris's cell. The broken nose resulted when the head rolled off the bed and struck the floor after a guard reached through the bars and pushed it. This photo, taken in Clarence Anglin's cell, shows how the dummy heads were arranged to fool the guards into thinking the inmates were asleep. Gathering the clues, we were notified immediately and asked to help. Our office in San Francisco set leads for offices nationwide to check for any records on the missing prisoners and on their previous escape attempts. All 3 had made them. We also interviewed relatives of the men and compiled all their identification records, and asked boat operators in the bay to be on the lookout for debris. Within 2 days, a packet of letters sealed in rubber and related to the men was recovered. Later, some paddle-like pieces of wood and bits of rubber inner tube were found in the water. A homemade life vest was also discovered washed up on Cronkite Beach, but extensive searches did not turn up any other items in the area. Homemade paddle recovered at prison. A similar one was recovered on Angel Island. One of the life vests made by the inmates? Piecing together the plan. As the days went by, the FBI, the Coast Guard, Bureau of Prison Authorities, and others began to find more evidence and piece together the ingenious escape plan. We were aided by inmate Alan West, who didn't make it out of his cell in time and began providing us with information. Here's what we learned. The group had begun laying plans the previous December when one of them came across some old saw blades, using crude tools, including a homemade drill made from the motor of a broken vacuum cleaner. The plotters each loosened the air vents at the back of their cells by painstakingly drilling closely spaced holes around the cover so the entire section of the wall could be removed. Once through, they hid the holes with whatever they could: a suitcase, a piece of cardboard, etc. Behind the cells was a common unguarded utility corridor. They made their way down this corridor and climbed to the roof of their cell block inside the building, where they set up a secret workshop. There, taking turns keeping watch for the guards in the evening before the last count. See the crude periscope they constructed for the lookouts. They used a variety of stolen and donated materials to build and hide what they needed to escape. More than 50 raincoats that they stole or gathered were turned into makeshift life preservers and a 6-kicks 14-foot rubber raft, the seams carefully stitched together and vulcanized by the hot steam pipes in the prison. The idea came from magazines that were found in the prisoners' cells. They also built wooden paddles and converted a musical instrument into a tool to inflate the raft. At the same time, they were looking for a way out of the building. The ceiling was a good 30 feet high, but using a network of pipes, they climbed up and eventually pried open the ventilator at the top of the shaft. They kept it in place temporarily by fashioning a fake bolt out of soap. Ventilation grate through which prisoners gained access to the utility corridor behind cell block B. Portion of concealed area on top of cell block B. Prisoners constructed tools for their escape here. The escape. On the evening of June 11th, they were ready to go. West, though, did not have his ventilator grill completely removed and was left behind. The 3 others got into the corridor, gathered their gear, climbed up and out through the ventilator, and got onto the prison roof. Then, they shimmied down the bakery smokestack at the rear of the cell house, climbed over the fence, and snuck to the northeast shore of the island and launched their raft. View from catwalk above cell block B, showing route prisoners took to access the roof of cell house. Ventilator cover on the roof of the Alcatraz prison through which the inmates made their escape. The mystery continues. What happened next remains a mystery. Did they make it across the bay, get to Angel Island, and then cross Raccoon Strait into Marin County as planned? Or did the wind and waves get the better of them? Plenty of people have gone to great lengths to prove that the men could have survived. But the question remains, did they? Our investigation at the time concluded otherwise for the following reasons. Crossing the bay. Yes, youngsters have made the more than mile-long swim from Alcatraz to Angel Island. But with the strong currents and frigid bay water, the odds were clearly against these men. 3 if by land. The plan, according to our prison informant, was to steal clothes and a car once on land. But we never uncovered any thefts like this, despite the high-profile nature of the case. Family ties. If the escapees had help, we couldn't substantiate it. The families appeared unlikely to even have the financial means to provide any real support. Missing in action. For the 17 years we worked on the case, no credible evidence emerged to suggest the men were still alive, either in the US or overseas. The FBI officially closed its case on December 31st, 1979, and turned over responsibility to the US Marshal Service, which continues to investigate in the unlikely event the trio is still alive. Boston Marathon bombing. Video surveillance of Tamerlan and Dzhokhar Tsarnaev. On April 15, 2013, as runners from around the world were cheered by thousands of spectators lining the streets for the 117th Boston Marathon, 2 self-radicalized brothers, Tamerlan and Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, executed the largest terrorist attack on US soil since 9/11. They detonated 2 powerful explosives near the finish line, killing 3 people and injuring more than 500 others. The attack set off a furious manhunt. 3 days after the bombing, the FBI released photos and video of the 2 suspects. Later that night, the terrorists drove to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT campus, where they shot and killed MIT police officer Sean Collier and attempted to steal his service weapon. The terrorists then carjacked a vehicle, kidnapped its driver, and forced him to drive to a gas station, robbing him of $800 along the way. After the driver escaped, the terrorists drove to Watertown, Massachusetts, where they detonated several improvised explosive devices, IEDs, and engaged in a firefight with law enforcement officers. During the standoff, Dzhokhar drove the carjacked vehicle at 3 officers, attempting to kill them, and ran over Tamerlan as he fled. Tamerlan died from injuries sustained at the scene. Dzhokhar was taken into custody after he was discovered hiding in a boat in the backyard of a Watertown residence. Dzhokhar, who was 19 years old at the time, was charged with use of a weapon of mass destruction resulting in death and conspiracy, along with 29 additional terrorism-related charges. In the high-profile federal trial, the prosecution team introduced over 1,000 exhibits and called more than 100 witnesses to the stand, including 14 victims who suffered amputations after the bombings. Others testifying included family members of those killed, survivors and eyewitnesses, experts in the areas of fingerprints, DNA, bombs and ballistics, law enforcement officers, and terrorism experts. Prosecutors also cross-examined nearly 50 defense witnesses. Some additional notable elements that helped shape the investigation: FBI Boston's Evidence Response Team, ERT, working with teams from the Boston Police Department, the Massachusetts State Police, and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, ATF, spent 9 days processing 12 square blocks near the bomb scenes. About 176 FBI laboratory and ERT personnel were deployed to Boston to assist. Evidence technicians processed more than 3,500 pieces of evidence and shipped 2,749 items to the laboratory in Quantico, Virginia, for further analysis. More than 33 terabytes of digital information were collected, including photos and video from the public via a special digital tip line developed to support the investigation. Linguists spent more than 2,500 hours translating material to support the investigation and trial. The Victim Services Division deployed 10 victim specialists from around the country to support Boston's specialists in providing support and resources to the victims and their families. A jury found Dzhokhar guilty on all 30 counts in the indictment. He was sentenced to death in June 2015. Opened and emptied fireworks found in Dzhokhar Tsarnaev's dormitory room. Accomplices Dias Kadirbayev, 19, and Azamat Tajayakov, 19, both of New Bedford, Massachusetts, were charged with, among other offenses, conspiring to destroy evidence, namely, a laptop computer and backpack containing fireworks. A third accomplice, Robel Philippos, of Cambridge, Massachusetts, was charged with willfully making materially false statements to federal law enforcement officials during a terrorism investigation. Bonnie and Clyde. Clyde Champion Barrow and Bonnie Parker were shot to death by officers in an ambush near Sales, Bienville Parish, Louisiana, on May 23, 1934, after one of the most extensive manhunts the nation had seen up to that time. Barrow was suspected of numerous killings and was wanted for murder, robbery, and state charges of kidnapping. The FBI, then called the Bureau of Investigation, became interested in Clyde and Bonnie in December 1932 through a singular bit of evidence. A Ford automobile that had been stolen in Pawhuska, Oklahoma, was found abandoned near Jackson, Michigan, in September of that year. At Pawhuska, law enforcement learned that another Ford car had been abandoned there after having been stolen in Illinois. In this car was a prescription bottle, which led special agents to a drugstore in Nacogdoches, Texas. Investigators learned the medicine had been prescribed to Clyde Barrow's aunt. Further investigation revealed that the woman who obtained the prescription had been visited recently by Clyde Barrow, Bonnie Parker, and Clyde's brother, L.C. It also was learned that these three were driving a Ford car, identified as the one stolen in Illinois. It was further shown that L.C. Barrow had secured the empty prescription bottle from a son of the woman who had originally obtained it. On May 20, 1933, the United States Commissioner at Dallas, Texas, issued a warrant against Clyde Barrow and Bonnie Parker, charging them with the interstate transportation, from Dallas to Oklahoma, of the automobile stolen in Illinois. The FBI then started its hunt for this elusive pair. The crime spree begins. Bonnie and Clyde met in Texas in January 1930. At the time, Bonnie was 19 and married to an imprisoned murderer. Clyde was 21 and unmarried. Soon after, he was arrested for a burglary and sent to jail. He He escaped using a gun Bonnie had smuggled to him, was recaptured, and was sent back to prison. Clyde was paroled in February 1932, rejoined Bonnie, and resumed a life of crime. Later in 1932, Bonnie and Clyde began traveling with Raymond Hamilton, a young gunman. Hamilton left them several months later and was replaced by William Daniel Jones in November. Ivan M. Buck Barrow, Clyde's brother, was released from the Texas State Prison on March 23, 1933, having been granted a full pardon by the government. He quickly joined Clyde, bringing his wife Blanche, bringing the group to 5. This gang embarked upon a series of bold robberies that made headlines across the country. They escaped capture in various encounters with the law. However, their activities made law enforcement efforts to apprehend them even more intense. During a shootout with police in Iowa on July 29, 1933, Buck Barrow was fatally wounded, and Blanche was captured. Jones, who was frequently mistaken for Pretty Boy Floyd, was captured in November 1933 in Houston, Texas, by the sheriff's office. Bonnie and Clyde went on together. On November 22, 1933, the Dallas, Texas sheriff and his deputies set a trap to capture Bonnie and Clyde near Grand Prairie, Texas, but the couple escaped the officers' gunfire. They held up an attorney on the highway and took his car, which they abandoned in Miami, Oklahoma. On December 21, 1933, Bonnie and Clyde held up and robbed a citizen at Shreveport, Louisiana. On January 16, 1934, 5 prisoners, including Raymond Hamilton, who was serving sentences totaling more than 200 years, were released from the Eastham State Prison Farm at Waldo, Texas, by Clyde, accompanied by Bonnie. 2 guards were shot by the escaping prisoners with automatic pistols that had been previously concealed in a ditch by Barrow. As the prisoners ran, Barrow covered their retreat with bursts of machine gun fire. Among the escapees was Henry Methvin of Louisiana. Bonnie Parker was listed as 5'5" and 100 pounds. Clyde Barrow left with William D. Jones, one of the Barrow gang. The last months. On April 1, 1934, Bonnie and Clyde encountered 2 young highway patrolmen near Grapevine, Texas. Before the officers could draw their guns, they were shot. On April 6, 1934, a constable at Miami, Oklahoma, was mortally wounded by Bonnie and Clyde. The criminals also abducted and wounded a police chief. Although the FBI had jurisdiction solely on the charge of transporting a stolen automobile, the efforts of Bureau agents were vigorous and relentless. Every clue was followed. Wanted notices, with fingerprints, photographs, descriptions, criminal records, and other information were distributed to all officers. Agents followed the trail through many states and into various haunts of the Barrow gang, particularly Louisiana. The association with Henry Methvin and the Methvin family of Louisiana was discovered by FBI agents, and they found that Bonnie and Clyde had been driving a car stolen in New Orleans. On April 13, 1934, an FBI agent obtained information that placed Bonnie and Clyde in a remote section southwest of that community. The Methvins' home was not far away, and the agent learned of visits there by Bonnie and Clyde. Special agents in Texas had learned that Clyde and Bonnie had been traveling from Texas to Louisiana, sometimes accompanied by Henry Methvin. The FBI and local law enforcement authorities in Louisiana and Texas concentrated on apprehending Bonnie and Clyde. It was learned that Bonnie and Clyde, with some of the Methvins, had staged a party at Black Lake, Louisiana, on the night of May 21, 1934, and were due to return to the area 2 days later. A crowd gathers around Bonnie and Clyde's bullet-ridden sedan. Before dawn on May 23, 1934, police officers from Louisiana and Texas concealed themselves in bushes along the highway near Sales, Louisiana. In the early daylight, Bonnie and Clyde appeared in an automobile, and when they attempted to drive away, the officers opened fire. Bonnie and Clyde were killed instantly. At the time they were killed, Bonnie and Clyde were believed to have committed 13 murders and several robberies and burglaries. Clyde was suspected of murdering 2 police officers at Joplin, Missouri. He was also suspected of kidnapping a man and a woman in rural Louisiana. He released them near Waldo, Texas. Numerous sightings linked this pair to bank robberies and automobile thefts. Clyde allegedly murdered a man at Hillsborough, Texas, committed robberies at Lufkin and Dallas, Texas, murdered one sheriff and wounded another at Stringtown, Oklahoma. kidnapped a deputy at Carlsbad, New Mexico, stole an automobile at Victoria, Texas, attempted to murder a deputy at Wharton, Texas, committed murder and robbery at Abilene and Sherman, Texas, committed murder at Dallas, Texas, abducted a sheriff and the chief of police at Wellington, Texas, and committed murder at Joplin and Columbia, Missouri. Al Capone. In the Roaring '20s, Al Capone ruled an empire of crime in the Windy City. Gambling, prostitution, bootlegging, bribery, narcotics trafficking, robbery, protection rackets, and murder. And it seemed that law enforcement couldn't touch him. The early bureau would have been happy to join the fight to take Capone down. But we needed a federal crime to hang our case on, and the evidence to back it up. Eventually, that day would come. Early years born of an immigrant family in Brooklyn, New York in January 1899, Al Capone quit school after the 6th grade and associated with a notorious street gang, becoming accepted as a member. Johnny Torrio was the street gang leader, and among the other members was Lucky Luciano, who would later attain his own notoriety. About 1920, at Torrio's invitation, Capone joined Torrio in Chicago, where he had become an influential lieutenant in the Colosimo mob. The racket spawned by enactment of the Prohibition Amendment, illegal brewing, distilling, and distribution of beer and liquor were viewed as growth industries. Torrio, abetted by Al Capone, intended to take full advantage of opportunities. The mob also developed interests in legitimate businesses in the cleaning and dyeing field, and cultivated influence with receptive public officials, labor unions, and employees' associations. Torrio soon succeeded to full leadership of the gang with the violent demise of Big Jim Colosimo, and Capone gained experience and expertise as his strong right arm. In 1925, Capone became boss when Torrio, seriously wounded in an assassination attempt, surrendered control and retired to Brooklyn. Capone had built a fearsome reputation in the ruthless gang rivalries of the period, struggling to acquire and retain racketeering rights to several areas of Chicago. That reputation grew as rival gangs were eliminated or nullified, and the suburb of Cicero became, in effect, a fiefdom of the Capone mob. The St. Valentine's Day Massacre on February 14, 1929, might be regarded as the culminating violence of the Chicago gang era, as 7 members or associates of the Bugs Moran mob were machine-gunned against a garage wall by rivals posing as police. The massacre was generally ascribed to the Capone mob, although Al himself was in Florida. The Bureau gets involved. The investigative jurisdiction of the Bureau of Investigation during the 1920s and early 1930s was more limited than it is now, and the gang warfare and depredations of the period were not within the Bureau's investigative authority. The Bureau's investigation of Al Capone arose from his reluctance to appear before a federal grand jury on March 12, 1929 in response to a subpoena. On March 11th, his lawyers formally filed for postponement of his appearance, submitting a physician's affidavit dated March 5th, which attested that Capone had been suffering from bronchial pneumonia in Miami, had been confined to bed from January 13th to February 23, and that it would be dangerous to Capone's health to travel to Chicago. His appearance date before the grand jury was reset for March 20th, on request of the U.S. Attorney's Office, Bureau of Investigation agents obtained statements to the effect that Capone had attended racetracks in the Miami area, that he had made a plane trip to Bimini and a cruise to Nassau, that he had been interviewed at the office of the Dade County Solicitor, and that he had appeared in good health on each of those occasions. Arrest and convictions. Capone appeared before the federal grand jury in Chicago on March 20, 1929, and completed his testimony on March 27th. As he left the courtroom, he was arrested by agents for contempt of court, an offense for which the penalty could be 1 year in prison and a $1,000 fine. He posted $5,000 bond and was released. On May 17, 1929, Al Capone and his bodyguard were arrested in Philadelphia for carrying concealed deadly weapons. Within 16 hours, they had been sentenced to terms of 1 year each. Capone served his time and was released in 9 months for good behavior on March 17, 1930. On February 28, 1931, Capone was found guilty in federal court on the contempt of court charge and was sentenced to 6 months in Cook County Jail. His appeal on that charge was subsequently dismissed. Meanwhile, the U.S. Treasury Department had been developing evidence on tax evasion charges. In addition to Al Capone, his brother Ralph Bottles Capone, Jake Greasy Thumb Guzik, Frank Nitti, and other mobsters were subjects of tax evasion charges. On June 16, 1931, Al Capone pled guilty to tax evasion and prohibition charges. He then boasted to the press that he had struck a deal for a 2.5-year sentence, but the presiding judge informed him he, the judge, was not bound by any deal. Capone then changed his plea to not guilty. On October 18, 1931, Capone was convicted after trial, and on November 24, was sentenced to 11 years in federal prison, fined $50,000, and charged $7,692 for court costs, in addition to $215,000 plus interest due on back taxes. The 6-month contempt of court sentence was to be served concurrently. While awaiting the results of appeals, Capone was confined to the Cook County Jail. Upon denial of appeals, he entered the U.S. Penitentiary in Atlanta, serving his sentence there and at Alcatraz. Release from prison. On November 16, 1939, Al Capone was released after having served 7 years, 6 months, and 15 days, and having paid all fines and back taxes. Suffering from paresis derived from syphilis, he had deteriorated greatly during his confinement. Immediately on release, he entered a Baltimore hospital for brain treatment, and then went on to his Florida home, an estate on Palm Island in Biscayne Bay near Miami, which he had purchased in 1928. Following his release, he never publicly returned to Chicago. He had become mentally incapable of returning to gangland politics. In 1946, his physician and a Baltimore psychiatrist, after examination, both concluded Capone then had the mentality of a 12-year-old child. Capone resided on Palm Island with his wife and immediate family in a secluded atmosphere until his death due to a stroke and pneumonia on January 25, 1947.